On the morning of December 12, 1910, a young woman walked out of her family's mansion on East 79th Street in Manhattan. She told her mother she was going shopping for a dress. She carried about $25 in her pocket and wore her favorite muff to keep her hands warm against the winter chill. She was 25 years old, beautiful, educated, and heir to one of New York's most respected fortunes. She was never seen again. Her name was Dorothy Arnold, and her disappearance would become one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. But Dorothy's story reveals something darker than a missing person case. It exposes a world where the most privileged young women in America lived under constant control, where fortunes measured in millions could not buy the right to choose your own path, where daughters of the elite were expected to marry well, behave properly, and abandon any dreams of their own. Dorothy wanted something her family considered absurd. She wanted to be a writer. She fell in love with a man her father despised. She rented a secret post office box to hide her correspondence from magazines and publishers. She led a double life because the one she was given offered no room for who she actually was. She was not alone. In the decades surrounding Dorothy's disappearance, America produced a generation of heiresses whose stories read like Gothic novels. Consuelo Vanderbilt sobbed through her wedding to a British duke because her mother demanded the match. Barbara Hutton inherited the Woolworth fortune as a child, married 7 times, and died with only $3,000 to her name. 10-year-old Gloria Vanderbilt became the most famous child in America when her mother and aunt fought over her custody in open court. 18-year-old Madeline Astor, 5 months pregnant, survived the sinking of the Titanic while her husband went down with the ship. These women had mansions on Fifth Avenue and summers in Newport, wardrobes from Paris, and diamonds that could buy entire towns. They appeared in the social register and danced at balls that cost more than most Americans earned in a decade. They were photographed, celebrated, envied. Yet so many lived lives marked by tragedy, scandal, and despair. This is the story of Dorothy Arnold and her generation, the daughters of the Gilded Age who discovered that all the money in the world cannot purchase the one thing they truly wanted, a life of their own. Chapter 1. The World That Made Her. To understand Dorothy Arnold, you must first understand what it meant to be born into American aristocracy at the turn of the 20th century. The Gilded Age stretched from roughly 1870 to 1910. Families like the Vanderbilts, the Astors, the Whitneys, and the Morgans accumulated fortunes that would equal tens of billions today. They constructed mansions rivaling European palaces. They collected old masters, imported French furniture, and built an elite society from nothing but money and ambition. This new aristocracy developed rigid rules, and no one bore the weight of those rules more heavily than the daughters. A young woman of this class began her preparation from childhood. Private tutors taught her French, often German or Italian. She studied music, drawing, and literature. Not to pursue these arts professionally. That would be vulgar. She learned them to become accomplished, to transform herself into a suitable ornament for whatever household she would eventually manage. Her movements were restricted from the earliest age. A proper young lady went nowhere unaccompanied. She did not speak to men without formal introduction. She kept her opinions to herself. She certainly did not work. Everything pointed toward one goal: marriage. A strategic marriage that would unite fortunes, strengthen social positions, and produce heirs. The debutante season marked the culmination of years of preparation. Young women were presented to society, usually at 18. This was not a celebration of adulthood. It was an announcement of availability, a signal that negotiations could begin. Caroline Astor ruled New York society during this era. Known simply as the Mrs. Astor, she maintained a list of exactly 400 acceptable families. Inclusion meant everything. Exclusion meant social death. Her annual ball determined who mattered and who did not. The pressure was relentless. A woman who remained unmarried past her early 20s became a subject of pity and whispered concern. She had failed at the only task that truly counted. Dorothy Arnold entered this world on July 1st, 1885. Her family was not Vanderbilt rich, but they were established and respectable. Her father, Francis, had graduated from Harvard and built a successful importing business dealing in perfumes and fine goods. The Arnolds appeared in the social register. They summered appropriately. They belonged. Dorothy was expected to follow the prescribed path: education, debut, marriage, motherhood, a life of comfortable predictability within acceptable boundaries. But Dorothy possessed something dangerous: ambition. She enrolled at Bryn Mawr College, one of the most rigorous academic institutions open to women. She graduated in 1905 with a degree in literature and languages. She read voraciously. She thought seriously about ideas, and she harbored a dream that made her family uncomfortable. Dorothy wanted to write professionally, real stories in real magazines, work that strangers would read and discuss. She submitted manuscripts to McClure's, one of the most prestigious publications of the era. They rejected her. She revised and submitted again. In November 1910, her story titled The Poinsettia Flames came back with another rejection letter, 4 weeks before she vanished. Her family responded with condescension. They found her literary aspirations amusing. When Dorothy asked her father for a small apartment in Greenwich Village where she might work seriously on her craft, he refused. That neighborhood attracted artists, radicals, unmarried women living independently. No daughter of Francis Arnold would be associated with such people. "A good writer can write anywhere," her father reportedly told her. What he meant was simpler. Stop this nonsense. Dorothy was trapped between the person she had been educated to become and the person she actually was. Bryn Mawr had trained her mind, but the world she inhabited had no use for a trained female mind unless it served a husband and household. Across America, young women from prominent families were confronting the same impossible contradiction. Some would eventually break free and build remarkable lives on their own terms. Others would be crushed by the attempt. Still others would simply vanish. Dorothy Arnold would become the most famous of them all, not for anything she accomplished, but for how completely she disappeared from a world that had no place for her. Chapter 2: The Price of Privilege. The nurseries of Gilded Age mansions were not happy places. Behind the French wallpaper and imported furniture, children of the American elite grew up in startling isolation. Parents were distant figures who appeared for formal occasions. Nannies, governesses, and tutors handled the actual raising. Playmates were carefully screened and limited to children from appropriate families. Consuelo Vanderbilt, born in 1877, later described her childhood at the family's Fifth Avenue mansion as a form of elegant imprisonment. Her mother, Alva, controlled every aspect of her existence: what she ate, what she wore, who she spoke with, how she sat and stood and walked. Alva Vanderbilt was not cruel by the standards of her time. She was ambitious. She had clawed her way into New York society through sheer force of will, marrying William Kissam Vanderbilt and then outmaneuvering the old guard families who looked down on Vanderbilt money as too new. Having achieved social prominence, Alva intended to secure it permanently through her daughter. Consuelo was groomed from childhood for a spectacular marriage. She wore a steel brace to improve her posture. She endured hours of deportment training. Her education focused on accomplishments that would impress European aristocracy: French conversation, piano performance, art appreciation. Nothing practical, nothing that might suggest she could survive without a husband. In her memoir, published decades later, Consuelo recalled the constant surveillance. "I was never allowed to be alone," she wrote. "Even my thoughts were not my own." She was beautiful, which helped. Tall and slender, with dark hair and large, expressive eyes, Consuelo photographed magnificently. But beauty in this world was not a personal attribute. It was family capital to be invested wisely. Barbara Hutton's childhood was darker still. Born in 1912, Barbara was the granddaughter of Frank Woolworth, founder of the five and dime store empire. Her mother, Edna, died when Barbara was 4 years old. The official cause was an ear infection that spread fatally. Rumors persisted for decades that Edna had actually taken her own life, driven to despair by her husband's constant affairs. No definitive proof ever emerged. Barbara's father, Franklin, showed little interest in raising his daughter. He remarried quickly and deposited Barbara with various relatives. She shuttled between households, never quite belonging anywhere. Her closest companion was her cousin Jimmy Donahue, who shared her Woolworth inheritance and would grow up to become infamous for his own scandals. At age 12, Barbara inherited approximately $26 million from her grandmother. At 21, she would receive the full fortune her father had managed in trust, by then grown to over $40 million. The newspapers called her the $1 million baby. What they did not report was the loneliness behind the headlines. Barbara attended the finest schools: Miss Hewitt's classes in Manhattan, Miss Porter's school in Connecticut. She learned everything a young heiress was supposed to learn. But no one taught her how to trust people. No one showed her what healthy love looked like. No one explained that money attracted predators. Her childhood produced a void that Barbara would spend her entire adult life trying to fill. With husbands, with possessions, with pills and alcohol. Nothing ever worked for long. Gloria Vanderbilt's early years became the most public disaster of them all. Born in 1924 to Reginald Vanderbilt and Gloria Morgan, little Gloria lost her father before she turned 2. Reginald drank himself to death at 45, leaving behind massive debts and a widow who had no idea how to manage money or raise a child. Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt was 21 years old, beautiful, and utterly unprepared for motherhood. She left her daughter in the care of a beloved nanny named Emma Kaislich, known as Dodo, and embarked on a decade of travel through Europe: Paris, London, Cannes. Gloria Morgan attended parties, cultivated aristocratic friends, and spent freely from her daughter's trust fund, while the child grew up without her. Little Gloria saw her mother rarely. When she did, the encounters were awkward and formal. The child clung to Dodo, the only consistent presence in her life. She later recalled feeling like an imposter in her own family, performing a role she did not understand. In 1932, everything collapsed. Gloria Morgan attempted to gain full control of her daughter's $5 million trust fund. The child's aunt, the formidable sculptor Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, intervened. She had watched her sister-in-law's neglect for years. Now she acted. The custody battle that followed made front-page news across America. In the depths of the Great Depression, the public devoured every detail of the feuding millionaires. Servants testified about Gloria Morgan's parties, her drinking, her romantic entanglements. A French maid described witnessing an intimate moment between Gloria Morgan and a female member of British royalty. 10-year-old Gloria was forced to testify against her own mother in closed chambers. She told the judge she was afraid of her mother. She wanted to live with Aunt Gertrude. The press dubbed her the poor little rich girl. The name would follow her for the rest of her life. Gertrude Whitney won custody, but victory brought little comfort to young Gloria. Her aunt had fought for her out of family duty, not love. Once the trial ended, Gertrude showed little interest in actually raising her niece. Gloria grew up in her aunt's Long Island estate, largely ignored, still clinging to memories of her nanny who had been dismissed after the trial. "I had no relationship with her at all," Gloria said of her mother decades later. "I worshipped her from afar. I felt no connection. I felt like an imposter. 3 childhoods, 3 different families, the same fundamental truth. Money could buy mansions and tutors and imported clothes. It could not buy attention, affection, or the simple experience of being known and loved for who you actually were." Dorothy Arnold's childhood left fewer traces in the historical record than these famous heiresses. Her family guarded their privacy carefully, and no memoir or court transcript preserved her early years. But the fragments that survive suggest a familiar pattern. Her father, Francis, was a busy man, absorbed in his importing business. Her mother, Mary, managed the household and social obligations. Dorothy had siblings, but seems to have been somewhat solitary by nature. She read constantly. She developed opinions that she learned to keep to herself. What set Dorothy apart was not her childhood. It was what happened when she tried to grow beyond it. While Consuelo and Barbara and Gloria were shaped by forces beyond their control, Dorothy actively resisted. She pursued education. She developed ambitions. She made plans. And that resistance, in the end, may have been what destroyed her. Chapter 3. Marriages Made in Ledgers. Between 1870 and 1914, more than 450 American women married into European nobility. The press called them dollar princesses. The name captured the transaction perfectly. American dollars exchanged for European titles. Daughters traded like commodities. The system operated with brutal efficiency. British aristocrats needed cash to maintain crumbling estates. American industrialists needed social prestige that money alone could not buy. The solution was marriage. A publication called Titled Americans even tracked these unions like stock prices, listing eligible bachelors and the fortunes required to secure them. Consuelo Vanderbilt became the most famous example of this marketplace. In the summer of 1895, 18-year-old Consuelo fell in love. Winthrop Rutherford was handsome, kind, and American. He cared about Consuelo as a person, not as a Vanderbilt. For a few months, she allowed herself to imagine a future with him. Her mother, Alva, had other plans. Alva Vanderbilt had spent years preparing her daughter for a spectacular match. She had identified the perfect candidate. Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough, possessed one of the oldest titles in England. He also possessed Blenheim Palace, a 200-room estate that was falling apart for lack of funds. When Consuelo refused to abandon Rutherford, Alva escalated. She confined her daughter to the house. She intercepted letters. She told Consuelo that the stress of her disobedience was destroying her heart, that continuing the relationship would literally kill her. Consuelo surrendered. The contract was negotiated like a business deal. $2.5 million in railroad stock, $100,000 in annual income. In exchange, Consuelo would become a duchess. On her wedding morning, November 6, 1895, Consuelo wept so violently her face swelled. Her maid spent hours applying cold compresses before she could appear in public. When she walked down the aisle at St. Thomas Church, she was not thinking about the Duke. She was mourning the life she would never have. The Duke reportedly admitted he had married her solely to save his estate. He never pretended otherwise. They produced 2 sons. They lived in separate wings of the palace, her money restored. The marriage lasted on paper until 1921. In her memoir, Consuelo described feeling like merchandise, traded for a title she had never wanted. Consuelo's story was extreme, but not unique. Jenny Jerome married Lord Randolph Churchill in 1874. She genuinely loved him. She did not know he carried syphilis that would slowly destroy his mind and kill him at 45. Mary Leiter married George Curzon, who became Viceroy of India. She supported his career with such total devotion that she worked herself to death at 36. Both women entered their marriages willingly. Both paid prices they never anticipated. Some dollar princesses found happiness. Nancy Langhorne married Waldorf Astor and eventually became the first woman to sit in British Parliament. But Nancy was exceptional. Most simply endured. Dorothy Arnold watched this world carefully. She was not wealthy enough to attract a duke, but she understood the system. Marriage meant surrendering control of your life to a husband chosen by your family. Romance was irrelevant. Compatibility was secondary. The only question that mattered was whether the match strengthened the family's position. Dorothy had seen what happened to women who followed these rules. She had also begun to imagine what might happen if she refused. Chapter 4. Dorothy's Secret Life. To the outside world, Dorothy Arnold remained a dutiful daughter. She attended social functions. She dressed appropriately. She gave no outward sign of rebellion. But Dorothy had learned to hide. Sometime in 1909, she rented a private post office box in Manhattan. The address allowed her to correspond with magazine editors without her family's knowledge. Every submission, every rejection would pass through this hidden channel. Her parents would see nothing. The post office box was practical. What came next was dangerous. His name was George Griscom, Jr. He was 42 years old, from a respectable Pittsburgh family, and he had never quite settled into a career. To Dorothy's father, Griscom represented everything wrong in a potential suitor. A middle-aged man with no clear purpose. An unsuitable match that would invite gossip and diminish the family's standing. Dorothy did not care what her father thought. She had found someone who listened to her, someone who took her writing seriously, someone who treated her as an adult with thoughts worth hearing. Their relationship deepened through letters that passed invisibly through Dorothy's secret post office box. By the summer of 1910, they had moved beyond correspondence. In September, Dorothy told her family she was visiting a college friend. She packed a bag and traveled to Boston. She checked into the Hotel Essex. George Griscom was waiting for her. What happened during that week in Boston would later become the subject of intense speculation. What matters is that Dorothy returned to New York having crossed lines that could not be uncrossed. She had lied to her family. She had spent a week alone with a man she was not married to. She had risked everything for a few days of freedom. Her parents discovered the truth. The historical record does not reveal how. Perhaps a friend mentioned seeing her. Perhaps the missing jewelry she had pawned to finance the trip raised questions. However it happened, Francis Arnold learned that his daughter had deceived him. He forbade any further contact with Griscom. Dorothy agreed. She had no choice. An unmarried woman in her father's house possessed no independent standing. Open defiance would cost her everything. But agreeing and obeying were different things. In the weeks that followed, Dorothy continued writing to Griscom in secret. The letters now carried additional weight. She was not merely hiding a romance. She was actively deceiving her family after promising to stop. Each letter was a small rebellion. Then came November. McClure's magazine rejected her latest story, The Poinsettia Flames. Dorothy had invested real hope in this submission. The rejection felt like a verdict on everything she had tried to become. She wrote to Griscom about it. The letter contained a line that would later haunt investigators. "Mother will always think an accident has happened." What did she mean? Was she contemplating something drastic? The words remain ambiguous over a century later. By early December 1910, Dorothy Arnold was maintaining an elaborate double life. The obedient daughter at 108 East 79th Street, the hidden woman with a secret post office box, a forbidden lover, and dreams that seemed to be dying one rejection at a time. The pressure was building, the secrets were multiplying, and the life she actually wanted seemed further away than ever. On December 12th, she walked out the front door and told her mother she was going shopping. She never came back. Chapter 5. The Day She Vanished. December 12th, 1910, was a cold Monday in Manhattan. Breath turned to vapor on the streets. Women kept their hands buried in fur muffs against the chill. The sky hung low and grey over the city. At 108 East 79th Street, the Arnold household followed its usual morning routine. Servants moved through the rooms. Breakfast was cleared. The day's schedule took shape through small domestic negotiations. Dorothy came downstairs dressed for an outing. Her younger sister Marjorie had a debutante party scheduled for December 17th, just 5 days away. The event required preparation. A new dress was needed. The conversation with her mother was brief and ordinary. Mary Arnold had no reason to pay special attention. Her daughter was going shopping on Fifth Avenue, back for dinner. The kind of errand young women from good families ran every week. Around 11 o'clock, the front door closed behind her. She carried approximately $25 in her pocket, enough for a comfortable day of shopping. She wore a long blue coat and a velvet hat. Her hands disappeared into a fur muff that would later become a detail investigators asked about repeatedly. Outside, the Upper East Side was quiet compared to the commercial streets further south. Brownstones lined the block. Delivery carts passed occasionally. A few other pedestrians moved along the sidewalks, bundled against the December air. She turned toward Fifth Avenue. The streets grew busier as she walked downtown. Store windows displayed Christmas merchandise. Shoppers moved between destinations, arms full of packages. The holiday season was reaching its peak, and Manhattan's shopping district hummed with commerce and anticipation. Her first stop was Park and Tilford, a fashionable establishment at 59th Street, known for fine foods and confections. The store catered to wealthy customers who expected quality and discretion. She browsed the displays briefly and charged a half-pound box of chocolates to the family account. The clerk who served her remembered nothing unusual, a polite young woman making a small purchase. The chocolates went into her muff. From there, she continued south. Fifth Avenue stretched ahead of her, block after block of shops and hotels and churches. The walk from 59th Street to 27th Street covered more than 30 blocks. At a leisurely pace, it would take nearly 40 minutes. Whether she stopped along the way or walked with purpose, no one recorded. She passed the grand department stores. She passed the limestone facades of millionaire mansions. She passed pedestrians who would never remember seeing her, who had no reason to notice one more well-dressed woman among thousands. Near 27th Street, she reached Brentano's bookstore. The shop was a destination for literary New Yorkers, its shelves stocked with new releases and imported editions. Dorothy had likely visited before. She moved comfortably through the aisles and selected a slim volume called Engaged Girl Sketches, a collection of humorous essays by Emily Calvin Blake. Light reading, the kind of book you buy on impulse. Outside the store, she encountered a familiar face. Gladys King was a young woman from the same social circles. They stopped on the sidewalk as acquaintances do, exchanging pleasantries while holiday shoppers streamed past. The conversation lasted only a few minutes. Dorothy mentioned she might walk home through Central Park despite the cold. She seemed cheerful, relaxed. Nothing in her manner suggested anxiety or distraction. They said goodbye. Gladys King walked away and continued with her day. The encounter was too ordinary to fix in memory. Just a brief chat with a friend on a busy street. That moment on the sidewalk outside Brentano's bookstore was the last confirmed sighting. After Gladys turned away, Dorothy Arnold disappeared from recorded history. The hours that followed have never been explained. Did she enter Central Park as she mentioned? Meet someone by arrangement? Change her plans entirely? No witness ever provided a reliable answer. No evidence ever surfaced. Evening came. Her chair sat empty at the dinner table. Her mother made excuses to the servants. A few hours of delay could be explained away. Shopping that ran long. Friends encountered unexpectedly. But night arrived, then morning, then another day. She had left with chocolates and a book and a promise to return. Somewhere between Brentano's bookstore and home, in the middle of one of the busiest cities on Earth, Dorothy Arnold vanished completely. No body, no ransom note, no letter of explanation, no credible witness ever came forward. The last known moment remains frozen on that sidewalk. 27th Street and 5th Avenue. A brief goodbye around noon. A cold Monday in December. After that, nothing. Chapter 6. Tragedies of the Titanic Generation. In the spring of 1912, less than 2 years after Dorothy Arnold vanished, the largest ship ever built sank into the North Atlantic. Among the 1,500 dead was John Jacob Astor IV. His young wife survived. Their story had begun with scandal. Madeline Force was 17 when she met Colonel Astor at Bar Harbor in the summer of 1910. He was 46, recently divorced, and immediately captivated by her. The age difference was 29 years. His son from his first marriage was older than this girl he now pursued. Society recoiled. Newspapers published disapproving editorials. Ministers refused to officiate. One clergyman called the courtship a disgrace to public decency. None of it mattered to Astor. He was accustomed to getting what he wanted. They married in September 1911 at the Astor Mansion in Newport. Madeline had just turned 18. The ceremony was small and quiet, performed by a Congregationalist minister after Episcopal clergy refused. Few guests attended. The couple left immediately for an extended honeymoon, escaping the whispers and stares. They traveled through Europe and Egypt, staying in the finest hotels, surrounded by servants and luxury. By early spring, Madeline was pregnant. Astor decided they should return to New York so the baby could be born at home, attended by American doctors. They booked passage on the maiden voyage of the Titanic. The ship departed Southampton on April 10th, 1912. The Astors occupied a first-class suite that cost more than most Americans earned in a decade. They brought a maid, a nurse, a valet, and a pet Airedale named Kitty. The ship was magnificent, the largest moving object ever built by human hands. Everyone agreed it was unsinkable. For 4 days, they enjoyed the crossing. Crystal chandeliers, orchestras at dinner, the easy confidence that came with occupying the finest accommodations on the finest ship in the world. On the night of April 14th, Madeline felt the collision as a slight shudder. Astor went to investigate. He returned and told her calmly that the ship had struck ice but there was no cause for alarm. He helped her dress warmly and led her to the boat deck. The scene there was chaos, masked as order. Officers loaded women and children into lifeboats while assuring everyone that the exercise was merely precautionary. Madeline, visibly pregnant and terrified, was helped into lifeboat 4. Astor asked the officer if he might accompany his wife, given her delicate condition. "No men," came the reply. "Women and children only." He reportedly asked for the lifeboat number so he could find her later. He did not yet understand that there would be no later. He kissed her goodbye. The lifeboat was lowered into the darkness. Madeline never saw her husband again. The Carpathia rescued her the following morning. She arrived in New York in a state of shock, pregnant and widowed at 19. Doctors ordered complete rest. For weeks, she could barely speak about what had happened. Astor's body was recovered from the Atlantic on April 22nd, 8 days after the sinking. He was identified by the initials on his jacket. His pockets contained $2,500 in cash. All that money, and it could not buy him a seat beside his wife. 4 months later, Madeline gave birth to a son. She named him John Jacob Astor VI. The terms of her husband's will became public. He had left her a $5 million trust fund and use of the mansion on Fifth Avenue. But there was a condition. If she ever remarried, she would forfeit everything. The money was designed to bind her permanently to his memory. A gilded chain. Madeline was 19 years old. The will demanded she remain a widow for the rest of her life or lose her inheritance. In 1916, she made her choice. She married William Carl Dick, a childhood friend. She surrendered the trust fund, the mansion, the Astor name. She traded millions for the possibility of happiness. The marriage lasted 17 years before ending in divorce. She married once more, briefly and unhappily. She died in 1940 at the age of 46, the same age John Jacob Astor had been when he first noticed her at Bar Harbor. Dorothy Arnold disappeared 18 months before the Titanic sailed. Her family spent years searching for answers that never came. The Astors, at least, had a body to bury, a grave to visit, a definite ending, however painful. Some tragedies announce themselves with icebergs and lifeboats and mourning headlines. Others arrive quietly on ordinary December afternoons and never explain themselves at all. Kopia hele. Her ren version uten mine kommentarer. Chapter 7. The Hunt for Dorothy. Dorothy Arnold did not come home on the evening of December 12th. She did not come home the next day, or the day after that. Her family told no one. For 6 weeks, the Arnolds maintained the pretense that nothing was wrong. When callers asked for Dorothy, her mother said she was ill. A headache, a cold, nothing serious. The servants were given no explanation. Friends received polite deflections. The family closed ranks and kept their crisis private. This silence was deliberate. Francis Arnold understood that publicity meant scandal. His daughter had vanished under circumstances he did not yet understand. If she had eloped, the family would be humiliated. If something worse had happened, the newspapers would feast on their tragedy. Better to search quietly and hope for a resolution that could be managed. He hired the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. The Pinkertons were the premier private investigation firm in America. They had chased train robbers and infiltrated labor unions. They knew how to find people who did not want to be found. Francis Arnold gave them his daughter's photograph and description and told them to work discreetly. The detectives began their search. They traced Dorothy's movements on December 12th. They interviewed shopkeepers and questioned servants. They looked for witnesses who might have seen her after she left Gladys King on Fifth Avenue. They found nothing. 6 weeks of professional investigation produced no credible leads, no sightings, no evidence of where Dorothy had gone or what had happened to her. The trail was cold before it ever warmed. In late January, Francis Arnold made a decision. He went to the police and then to the press. On January 25th, 1911, he held a press conference and announced that his daughter had been missing for over a month. He offered a $1,000 reward for information. The story exploded across the front pages. New York Times, New York Herald, papers in Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago. The disappearance of a wealthy young woman from a prominent family was exactly the kind of mystery that sold newspapers. Reporters descended on the Arnold home. They dug into Dorothy's background. They interviewed anyone who might have known her. And they found the secrets her family had tried to bury: the private post office box, the forbidden relationship with George Griscom, the secret week in Boston. Every detail Dorothy had hidden now appeared in headlines. The scandal was precisely what Francis Arnold had feared. But Griscom had an alibi. When Dorothy disappeared on December 12th, Griscom was in Florence, Italy, with his parents. He had been there for weeks. On December 16th, 4 days after the disappearance, he received a telegram from the Arnold family asking if he knew where Dorothy was. His reply was immediate. No, absolutely nothing. Dorothy's mother and brother sailed for Italy in January. They confronted Griscom at the Anglo-American Hotel in Florence. The meeting was tense. By some accounts, John Arnold physically assaulted Griscom before demanding answers. Griscom provided the letters Dorothy had written him. The letters revealed a woman in despair. The November rejection from McClure's, the sense of failure closing in, and that haunting final line about her mother believing an accident had happened. Investigators could not agree on its meaning. Was she contemplating something drastic, planning to disappear? The words remained ambiguous. John Arnold later claimed the letters contained nothing important. He destroyed them. Whatever other secrets those pages held vanished with them. The investigation continued through 1911 and beyond. Tips arrived by the hundreds. Dorothy had been seen in Boston, in Philadelphia, in Mexico City, on a ship bound for Europe. Each lead was pursued. Each proved false. Theories multiplied. Some believed Dorothy had taken her own life, overwhelmed by failed ambitions and forbidden love. Central Park contained a reservoir. The East River was never far away. A body might never surface. Others suspected murder. A young woman alone on crowded streets was vulnerable. She might have been followed, robbed, killed and disposed of before anyone noticed. A darker theory emerged in 1916. A doctor running an illegal clinic in Pennsylvania claimed that Dorothy had died on his operating table during a procedure. He said he had been paid to bury the body secretly. Police excavated the site he indicated. They found nothing. The doctor later recanted. He was a convicted felon looking for attention. Some believed Dorothy had simply walked away, assumed a new name, started a new life somewhere far from her family's expectations. This theory appealed to those who wanted a happy ending, but no evidence ever supported it. The mystery remained open. No theory could be proven. No theory could be dismissed. Dorothy Arnold had stepped into a crowd and dissolved. Chapter 8. 7 Husbands and Zero Happiness. In 1930, at the height of the Great Depression, 18-year-old Barbara Hutton made her debut into society with an $80,000 party at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. The timing was catastrophic. Millions of Americans were unemployed. Bread lines stretched around city blocks. Newspapers ran photographs of Barbara in diamonds and silk, alongside stories of families losing their homes. The public dubbed her the poor little rich girl, and the nickname was not meant kindly. Barbara seemed oblivious to the optics, or perhaps she simply did not care. The loneliness of her childhood had left her hungry for attention, for celebration, for some evidence that she mattered. If money could buy a spectacular party, then money would be spent. 3 years later, she made the first of 7 marriages. Prince Alexis Medivani was handsome, charming, and Georgian royalty. He was also a professional fortune hunter whose family had perfected the art of marrying wealthy women. Barbara was 20 years old and desperate to be loved. She did not see the trap until it closed around her. On their wedding night, Alexis looked at his new bride and told her she was too fat. The cruelty was calculated. He spent the marriage undermining her confidence while spending her money lavishly. When they divorced 2 years later, he walked away with a substantial settlement. He died in a car accident shortly after, driving a sports car Barbara's money had purchased. The pattern was established. Barbara would repeat it 6 more times. Her second husband, Count Kurt von Haugwitz-Reventlow, gave her the one thing she wanted most: a son. Lance was born in 1936, and Barbara adored him. But the marriage itself was bitter. The Count was controlling and cold. Their divorce became an international custody battle that dragged through courts for years. Husband number 3 was the only one who left her richer than he found her. Cary Grant married Barbara in 1942. He was already a famous actor. He did not need her money. Their union produced genuine affection, but not lasting compatibility. They divorced after 3 years. Grant refused any settlement. The press called them Cash and Carry, a joke that Barbara did not find amusing. The remaining marriages blurred together in a haze of titles, settlements, and disappointment. Prince Igor Trubetskoy, Dominican playboy Porfirio Rubirosa, whose affair with Barbara's rival Doris Duke only added humiliation to the transaction. Baron Gottfried von Kram, a German tennis star. Prince Raymond Dohn Vin, whose title Barbara reportedly purchased for him from a deposed Laotian royal family. Each husband took something: money, confidence, time. Barbara gave freely, hoping that generosity would inspire loyalty. It never did. By her 50s, the damage was visible. Barbara had developed severe anorexia. She weighed barely 80 pounds at times. She drank heavily. She relied on pills to sleep and pills to wake. The beauty that had once graced magazine covers was gone. Her son Lance had grown into a troubled young man. He raced cars. He married actress Jill St. John. He seemed to be finding his way. Then, in 1972, his plane crashed in Colorado. He was 36 years old. Barbara never recovered. The one relationship that had truly mattered was gone. She spent her final years in increasing isolation. The Woolworth fortune, once valued at nearly $50 million, had been bled away by husbands, hangers-on, and her own compulsive generosity. She gave money to strangers. She bought gifts for people she barely knew. Spending was the only language of connection she understood. Barbara Hutton died in May 1979 at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel in Los Angeles. She was 66 years old. Her estate contained approximately $3,000. The newspapers ran obituaries recounting her marriages and her misfortunes. They called her the poor little rich girl one final time. The nickname had followed her for nearly 50 years, from that tone-deaf debutante ball through 7 weddings and countless scandals. In the end, it was all anyone remembered. Dorothy Arnold vanished before she could discover whether freedom would bring happiness or simply different forms of suffering. Barbara Hutton lived that experiment to its conclusion. She had everything Dorothy was denied: independence, travel, the ability to choose her own partners, even if she chose badly. No father controlled her movements. No social convention forced her into an arranged marriage. And yet, Barbara's life answered no questions. It only raised new ones. If wealth could not protect you from loneliness, what could? If freedom to choose led only to choosing wrong, what was freedom worth? Dorothy Arnold disappeared at 25, her life interrupted before it truly began. Barbara Hutton survived to 66 and found that survival was not the same as living. Chapter 9. The Ones Who Broke Free. The cage had doors, if you knew where to look. Not every heiress drowned in her inheritance. Gertrude Vanderbilt started drawing before she could write her own name. She filled notebooks with sketches when she was supposed to be learning needlepoint. Her family tolerated this as a phase. Vanderbilt daughters did not become artists. They became wives. At 21, she married Harry Payne Whitney, uniting two of the largest fortunes in America. She bore 3 children. She sat for portraits and hosted dinners and performed every duty expected of her position. Then she rented a studio in Greenwich Village. The address was deliberate. Greenwich Village was where artists lived, not heiresses. Gertrude worked there in anonymity, sculpting figures in clay and bronze, alongside people who had no idea her great-grandfather had owned more railroads than anyone in history. She exhibited under her married name. Critics praised her work, without knowing they were reviewing a Vanderbilt. Her brother Alfred died on the Lusitania in 1915, a German torpedo. Witnesses said he gave his life vest to a young mother with an infant. He could not swim. His body never surfaced. Gertrude responded the only way she knew how. She worked. Her Titanic memorial stands in Washington to this day, honoring men who surrendered lifeboat seats to women and children. She carved grief into bronze and made it permanent. By the 1920s, she had become the most significant patron of American art. She purchased work from young painters no gallery would show. She gave them studio space. She championed the unfashionable and the overlooked. In 1931, she founded the Whitney Museum of American Art, donating her entire collection. The money that might have smothered her became something else entirely. A tool, a purpose, a reason to wake up. Doris Duke took a different route to the same destination. She was 12 years old in 1925 when her father died and left her roughly $100 million in tobacco money. The newspapers crowned her the richest girl in the world. Photographers followed her everywhere. Strangers proposed marriage by mail. Doris wanted none of it. She dressed in plain clothes. She avoided parties. While other heiresses competed for attention, she disappeared. She traveled to places where her name meant nothing. She studied Islamic architecture in Morocco and Iran, learning to identify tile patterns and calligraphy styles. She learned to surf in Hawaii before anyone considered it fashionable. She constructed a home in Honolulu called Shangri-La, filling it with fountains and mosaics she had collected across 3 continents. Her marriages failed. 2 husbands, both disappointing. Like Barbara Hutton, she seemed unable to attract partners who wanted her rather than her checkbook. But unlike Barbara, Doris refused to let romantic failure consume her. She created foundations for medical research. She preserved historic buildings that developers wanted to demolish. She funded environmental causes decades before conservation became mainstream. The fortune she had inherited became a mechanism for change, rather than a measure of her worth. Doris Duke died in 1993. She had given away hundreds of millions. The loneliness never entirely lifted, but she had found something to do with her days besides count her losses. Gloria Vanderbilt invented herself from wreckage. The custody trial of 1934 had made her famous at 10 years old, her father dead before she could remember him, her mother declared unfit, her childhood a newspaper headline. She might have crumbled. Many would have. Instead, Gloria acted on Broadway. She painted canvases and showed them in galleries. She wrote novels and memoirs. In the 1970s, she became a fashion designer, putting her signature on jeans that sold tens of millions of pairs. The transformation was deliberate. Gloria Vanderbilt refused to remain the poor little rich girl of the tabloids. She earned her own money. She created her own reputation. She became famous for what she made rather than what she had inherited. When interviewers asked about her past, she answered without self-pity. In 2016, at 92, she told CNN simply, "I had a terrible childhood, but I survived it." She died in 2019, 95 years old, surrounded by family she had chosen, defined by work she had done. 3 women, 3 different answers to the same impossible question. Dorothy Arnold never had the chance to find her own answer. She vanished at 25, her ambitions still secret, her potential still untested. Whether talent and determination might have carried her past the barriers of her world remains unknown. The cage had doors. Some women found them. Dorothy disappeared before she could try. Chapter 10. A Father's Obsession. Francis Arnold was a man who solved problems, Harvard-educated, successful importer. He had built a comfortable fortune through diligence and careful judgment. When obstacles arose, he addressed them methodically and moved forward. His daughter's disappearance offered no such resolution. In the weeks after December 12th, Francis conducted himself as he always had. He gathered information. He hired professionals. He kept the matter private until privacy became impossible. These were rational responses to an irrational situation. But rationality requires an endpoint, a conclusion. Some moment when the problem is either solved or abandoned. Dorothy's case offered neither. The first year was the hardest and the easiest. Hardest because hope remained vivid. Every telegram might bring news. Every knock at the door might be Dorothy herself, returned with explanations. Francis threw resources at the search with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting results. Easiest because action was still possible. There were leads to follow, detectives to direct, witnesses to interview. Francis could fill his days with effort, and effort felt like progress. The leads were endless and worthless. A hotel clerk in Boston thought he recognized Dorothy from her photograph. Francis traveled there personally. The woman was a stranger. A ship's steward reported a passenger matching her description on a liner bound for England. Francis hired investigators in London. They found nothing. A rancher in Colorado wrote to say a young woman had appeared at his property, confused and unable to remember her name. Francis sent men to investigate. The woman was decades older than Dorothy and had lived in the area for years. Each false lead carved away something, not hope exactly, something harder to name. The belief that the world made sense, that effort produced results, that a father could protect his child. Mary Arnold withdrew into silence. She had always been the quieter parent, content to let Francis manage difficulties while she maintained the household. Now there was no household to maintain, only waiting. She stopped attending social functions. She stopped receiving visitors. The brownstone on East 79th Street, once filled with dinner parties and family gatherings, grew still. Servants moved through empty rooms. The chair where Dorothy had sat remained in its place, neither used nor removed. Mary rarely spoke about her daughter in the years that followed. Whether this was grief too deep for words or something else entirely, no one recorded. She became a ghost in her own home, present but unreachable. Francis could not accept stillness. He continued searching long after the professionals had given up. He corresponded with police departments across the country. He followed newspaper accounts of unidentified women found dead or alive. He paid for information that never led anywhere. The expense was staggering. Contemporary estimates placed his expenditure somewhere between $250,000 and $1 million. In an era when a skilled worker earned perhaps $1,000 annually, Francis Arnold spent a fortune chasing shadows. Some wondered if guilt drove him. Francis had opposed Dorothy's writing ambitions. He had refused her request for a small apartment where she might work seriously. He had dismissed her literary hopes as a phase she would outgrow. He had not known the depths of her despair until investigators showed him her letters. What else had he missed? What conversations had never happened because he was too busy, too certain, too convinced that he knew what was best for his daughter? These questions have no answers, but a man searching for 11 years is a man searching for more than a missing person. He is searching for absolution, for a chance to say what was never said, for proof that he was not, in some way he cannot name, responsible. The years passed. 1912, 1915, 1918. The world changed around Francis Arnold, while he remained fixed on December 1910. His health declined. The vigor that had built his business drained away. Photographs from his later years show a man hollowed out, eyes focused on something the camera could not capture. Francis Arnold died in his early 70s. He had spent the final 11 years of his life looking for a daughter who was never found. His will contained a painful necessity. He declared Dorothy legally dead. The law required finality for the estate to be settled. Francis could no longer provide the certainty himself. The declaration changed nothing. No body was recovered. No grave was dug. Dorothy Arnold remained exactly what she had been since December 12, 1910, missing. Her father died without answers. Her mother lived on for several more years, silent and diminished. The family that had once occupied a proud place in New York society faded into footnote and mystery. Francis Arnold was not a villain. He was a man of his time and class, with the limitations that implies. He wanted for his daughter what he believed was best. He was wrong about what that meant. Most parents are, in one way or another. His punishment was 11 years of wondering, 11 years of hoping and dreading in equal measure, 11 years of searching for a door that never opened. Dorothy vanished in an afternoon. Her father spent the rest of his life trying to follow. Chapter 11. 115 Years of Silence. Mary Arnold outlived her husband by 6 years. She died in 1928, still waiting. No memoir survives. No letters describing what those final years held. The historical record offers only silence where her voice should be. A mother who lost a daughter and then spent 18 years in a house full of absence. Whether she believed Dorothy dead or alive, whether she blamed herself or her husband or the world that had constrained them all, no one recorded. Mary Arnold passed from history as quietly as her daughter had vanished from Fifth Avenue. The siblings scattered. John Arnold, who had traveled to Italy and confronted George Griscom, rarely spoke publicly about his sister after the initial investigation. He married. He pursued his own career. Whatever burden he carried privately. Marjorie Arnold, 4 years younger than Dorothy, had been planning a debutante party on the day her sister disappeared. She grew up in the shadow of that absence. She too married and moved forward. building a life defined by what she chose rather than what she had lost. The Arnold family did not become crusaders. There was no foundation established in Dorothy's name, no annual appeals for information, no family spokesperson keeping the case alive across decades. They had searched. They had spent a fortune. They had found nothing. At some point, they stopped. This was not unusual for the era. Families absorbed tragedies and continued. Public grief was considered unseemly. The Arnolds had already endured more scrutiny than any respectable family should bear. Their withdrawal from the story was itself a form of survival. The brownstone at 108 East 79th Street passed out of Arnold ownership. The neighborhood evolved. The building that had once held Dorothy's secrets became simply another address in a city full of addresses. No plaque marks the site. No tourist stops to photograph the doorway she walked through on December 12, 1910. The physical evidence of Dorothy Arnold's existence has largely vanished. Her manuscripts were never published. Whatever stories she wrote, whatever voice she was developing, disappeared with her, or was discarded by a family eager to move past their ordeal. The rejection letter from McClure's magazine does not survive. The letters she wrote to George Griscom were destroyed by her brother. The post office box was closed. What remains are newspaper clippings, police reports, the recorded memories of people who knew her, filtered through journalists and investigators and time. Dorothy Arnold exists now only in the words others wrote about her. This is the particular cruelty of disappearance. Death provides an ending, a body, a funeral, a grave where flowers can be placed. Grief follows a path, however painful, towards something that resembles acceptance. The missing offer no such mercy. For 18 years, Mary Arnold could not know whether to mourn or hope. Every stranger on the street might be Dorothy. Every letter might bring news. The wound could never close because closing it meant abandoning the possibility that her daughter might still walk through the door. Ambiguous loss, psychologists now call it. The term did not exist in 1910. The experience did. The theories that emerged in 1911 remain the same theories discussed today. She took her own life. The reservoir in Central Park, the rivers surrounding Manhattan. A body might never surface. This theory explains the absence of evidence, but not the absence of witnesses. How does a well-dressed young woman drown herself in daylight without anyone noticing? She was murdered, a random act of violence on a crowded street, a planned attack by someone who knew her movements. This theory requires a killer who left no trace, no boast, no deathbed confession across more than a century. She died from a medical procedure, the claim from a Pennsylvania doctor who later recanted, the excavation that found nothing. But the theory persists because it explains both the secrecy and the disappearance. She walked away, changed her name, started over somewhere far from the expectations that suffocated her. This theory appeals to those who want Dorothy to have found the freedom she sought. It requires believing she never contacted anyone she loved for the rest of her life, that she read about her father's search and said nothing, that she lived for decades as someone else entirely. None of these theories have been proven. None have been disproven. The case remains exactly where it was in 1911. Open, unsolved, unknowable. Modern true crime enthusiasts have rediscovered Dorothy Arnold. Podcasts examine her story. Amateur detectives comb through digitized newspaper archives. Online forums debate the same questions investigators debated a century ago. They will find nothing new. The evidence that might have solved this case was never collected. Forensic science, as we know it, did not exist. There was no DNA to analyze, no surveillance cameras to review, no cell phone records to subpoena. Dorothy Arnold vanished in an era when a person could simply cease to exist. 115 years have passed since she walked out of her family's brownstone. The witnesses are dead. The investigators are dead. George Griscom died in 1937, taking whatever he knew or suspected to his grave. Everyone who ever met Dorothy Arnold is gone. What remains is the question she left behind: a young woman, a winter afternoon, a crowded street, and then nothing. Chapter 12. The Gilded Cage Never Opened. What would she have become? The question cannot be answered. That is why it remains. She had written stories no one published. She had loved a man no one approved. She had walked through a world that offered her everything except the one thing she wanted, and then she stepped off the edge of the known and into something else entirely. Not death, necessarily. Not life, necessarily. Just absence. The most complete absence a person can leave behind. We want endings. We want the door to open or close, not to hang forever ajar. We want the footsteps to return or to fade into confirmed silence. We want to know. Dorothy Arnold left no such mercy. She is not a lesson. Her story does not instruct. It does not warn against wealth or praise, escape, or condemn the world that made her. It simply stops. A sentence interrupted mid-word, a breath drawn but never released. The women who shared her world found their endings: happiness or misery, triumph or ruin, long life or early death. Their stories can be weighed and measured. Conclusions can be drawn. Dorothy permits no conclusions. She walked south on Fifth Avenue and out of all judgment. Whatever she became, whatever she suffered, whatever peace or horror found her. It happened beyond the reach of the record, beyond the reach of us. 115 years is long enough for everything to change. The city she knew has been demolished and rebuilt a dozen times over. The rules that governed her life have been discarded. The world that made her impossible has itself become impossible. Yet the question persists. A woman, young and unhappy, and searching for something she could not name. A December afternoon, ordinary in every way. A crowd that parted around her and closed again and kept moving. And somewhere in that movement, a vanishing so complete that a century of asking has produced nothing but its own echo. She left no answer. Perhaps that was the only freedom available to her. Perhaps it was no freedom at all. We will never know. She made certain of that.